in Boots. Once upon a time there lived a poor miller who had 3 sons. When he died, all he owned was distributed among his sons. The eldest had the mill. The second had the donkey. And the youngest son had the miller's cat. The boy was very fond of the cat, but he could not see how the cat could ever make him rich. As he gently petted the cat, she said, "Don't worry, master. If you do what I tell you, you will see how much I can do for you. First, get me a large bag and a pair of boots." The youngest son of the miller took some of the money he had and bought a large bag and a fine pair of yellow-colored boots. The cat put on her new pair of boots and at once went out into the garden. This was Puss in Boots. She picked up some carrots from the garden and put them in the bag. Then she went off across the fields until she found a rabbit hole. She put the bag down with its mouth wide open so that the carrot could be seen. Then she hid herself behind a low hedge. Soon a fat grey rabbit came out of the hole. He smelled the fresh carrots and jumped into the bag to eat them. Puss in Boots immediately jumped from behind the hedge and quickly tied a string around the bag. The fat rabbit was caught. Then Puss, wearing her yellow boots, carried the bag on her shoulder and came to the king's palace. She bowed before the king and said, "Your Majesty, I have brought you a fat rabbit from the estate of my master, the Prince of Carabas." The king was surprised to see the yellow boots. But he did not show his surprise. He accepted the gift. The next day, Puss put a handful of grain into her bag and went out into the fields. She put the bag on the ground and lay down beside it, pretending to be dead. Two parrots came and started to eat the grain. Puss in Boots waited for the right moment and quickly tied a string around the bag, catching both the parrots inside. Once more, she set off for the palace and presented herself before the king. "My master, the Prince of Carabas, begs you to accept these 2 parrots," said Puss in Boots, bowing with respect. "Tell your master," said the king, "I am pleased to accept his gift. He must have a fine castle." "Oh yes, it is very fine," said Puss, bowing before the king before leaving him. As she went through the halls in the palace, she heard that the king and his daughter were going to drive beside the river that afternoon. Puss raced home to his master and told him about her visit to the king's palace. She then said to him, "I want you to go and swim in the river. If anyone asks your name, say that you are the Prince of Carabas. The miller's son left Puss in Boots to guard his boots. And went to swim in the river. Puss carefully hid his master's clothes under a pile of stones and waited for the royal carriage. As the carriage came near, Puss ran in front of it, shouting, "Help, help! The Prince of Carabas is drowning!" The king stopped the carriage and ordered his servants to rescue the prince. Then Puss went up to the carriage with her hat in her hand. She bowed before the king and the princess and said, "We are indeed so grateful that you passed by, but alas, a thief has stolen my master's clothes." The king sent a servant to the palace to get a suit. When the miller's son put it on, he looked just like a prince. "This is my master, the Prince of Carabas," said Puss to the king and the princess, as she graciously introduced herself to the miller's son. "We hope you will drive on and dine with the prince." "It will be a pleasure," replied the king, and he invited the prince to ride in his carriage. Puss ran across the fields ahead of the carriage. When she met some haymakers, she warned them, "When the king passes this way and inquires to whom this field belongs, you have to say, 'To the Prince of Carabas, your majesty.' If you don't say so, you will be cut into little pieces." Now, the land actually belonged to a terrible giant. All the people were afraid of him. But Puss walked boldly into his castle. "I've heard that you can turn yourself into any animal you wish. Is that true?" asked Puss calmly. "Oh, yes, of course," said the giant, full of pride. In a flash, he became a roaring lion. Though Puss was terrified at the sight of a big lion, she continued bravely, "It truly is amazing that you can become a big lion. But surely it would be difficult for you to change into a tiny creature such as a mouse." The giant said, "Oh no, it is no problem at all." In an instant, he became a tiny mouse. Puss sprang upon the tiny mouse and with one shake killed it. Thus, the giant who became a tiny mouse died. At that very moment, the king's carriage came near the castle. "You have a large estate and a fine castle," said the king to the miller's son. The king was told by the haymakers that the fields belonged to the Prince of Carabas. The king, the princess, the miller's son, and Puss went inside the castle and sat down to a grand feast. "This young man would become a good husband for my daughter," thought the king, and he turned to the miller's son, saying, "Will you marry my daughter?" The miller's son and the princess fell in love with each other. soon they got married and lived happily in the giant's castle. Puss in Boots lived in comfort for the rest of her days, and she never had to hunt again.